Uniform Education is the official recruitment sponsor for the SLT podcast. They specialize in SEN recruitment in and around London. So, if you are an SEN provision, a mainstream school, a local authority who needs specific SEN trained staff, make sure you contact Uniform Education and don't forget to mention the SLT podcast. Welcome to the SLT podcast. As you can see, we're in a brand new setup. Yeah, we're looking very. What did you say, Anne-Marie? It's very news.
Like a news presenter, like a studio when you get the news, the desk and the background.
Yes. Yeah, I like this setup. It's giving Trevor McDonald. It's
Yeah,
giving
it is.
Morris
It's
Jones.
Charlene.
Yeah, Charlene.
Charlene,
Yes, Miss White. Yes.
Yeah, Charlene White.
Wonderful. So, it's lovely to have you in. Today's episode is going to be titled "Safeguarding is Everyone's Job, but who's really accountable?" We have an amazing, experienced guest in. And I'm going to be honest, it wasn't me. It was my co-host Rena who recruited you, and she's so good in doing. I think it was at the ASEN.
Yes, conference. She came up to me. We need to get you on. I said, okay, email me.
And she did.
And
she did. Brilliant. So the core theme of today is going to be the reality of safeguarding in UK schools. Now we know. As an Ofsted criteria is one of those. If you don't tick safeguarding, you have failed. So, what leaders are saying versus what's actually happening, and where are their system failures? So we have the amazing Anne-Marie's Christian, isn't it?
Christian, my married name, yes.
Yes, Anne-Marie Christian, who's going to be talking to us about safeguarding. So, let's be honest. Let's be honest. Yeah. I tend to feel, and I don't know if I'm correct, and you can kind of correct me, yeah, that it's often a bit of a tick box exercise in regards to safeguarding, yeah, and oftentimes people they're not looking into, or they kind of see it as a policy thing, it's a theory, but safeguarding is actually real and tangible, and oftentimes it's just, we've got the policy, yes, we've done this, and I'd kind of like to investigate your take on that, but firstly I want to get your story, so tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, so I am a qualified social worker of 30 years, qualified in 1996, and I worked in lots of different roles. So my mother was a foster carer in my late teens, so that brought me, I was a foster sister to foster children.
Same.
And from there I then first found out about potentially child abuse, or people who've been through, child abuse at home or within their family network or in society. And you're talking about the 90s. And then I went on to do a bit of residential social work, and then I did my degree.
Okay.
Qualified in 96, did 2 placements. One was a local authority and one was in a residential home. I'm from West London, so that was in Brent, and one was in Barnet.
Okay. So did you grow up in Brent?
I was born in Brent, and then I grew up in Harrow. So I went to Harrow when I was 7, but I was born in Brent, Northwest, Central Middlesex Hospital, and then lived in Harrow. So I went to Hertfordshire University, and in qualifying, I then did locum work, which means agency work. I did Ealing, and I did Camden, and then did my permanent role, which was in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea.
So you've kind of answered one of the questions already, and it's interesting because I have foster siblings as well, and rarely do I refer to them as foster. Do you think that seeing that process was one of the kind of sparks for you going into social work, or because it tends to be in you? I tend to find.
Yeah. I hear that. I went to loads of meetings with my mum. So mother and I, we used to go to meetings like LAC reviews, looked after children reviews. And I used to see how the social workers used to do their visits to the home and didn't really pay interest or get to know the actual child. Like the child was just another case. And then we get to know the children and also boost their self-esteem, make them feel positive. And a lot of them are conflicted based on they still love their birth family, even the person potentially who harmed them, and they couldn't understand why they were in care. So again, whether it was a male or female foster, sibling, we'd spend time, and then the social work part got involved when I then used to see the disconnect, and I thought, no, this is something I could do better. So then in looking at the degree, I went to do the degree, and then I found out more. We did law, we did psychology, we do sociology, we do a lot about child development. So I had to study a newborn baby for 12 weeks and saw how a baby would communicate non-verbally, etc., which is really important when you're working with children, that I think we miss. And then in qualifying, I then felt quite empowered to then, understand and be child-centered. So the foster sister experience really taught me the voice of the child, the importance of the child's voice, and their well-being is so important. So that's what led me there. And then I worked in child protection in the neighbourhood area for Kensington and Chelsea. And then I did a unique, when I say genuine, it was a really unique role in 1999 to 2003. I was based in a secondary school in London as an inclusion project. Yep. And in that role, I was the senior social worker. We had youth workers, learning mentors. And there was something called Connection Advisors back then. You might remember them with an X.
Yes, I do.
Connection Advisors. So it was a project. We reduced exclusion rate within a term. Behaviour had improved, and it was inner London. So what was brilliant about that role was getting to see the children in their crisis point, doing a lot of preventative work. I was based in a school, and I was a magnet to them. I was their big sister, etc. Or, in that role model of being someone who's quite, neutral, but giving them good positive vibes. So I loved that role. And then I went on to work for local authority in managing social workers. So I did we call it practice educator, just like practice teaching post-grad, which means you then can assess social workers, students, and then you become a social work manager. So I did that post-grad, and then I became a social work manager.
Before you go on to that, because that is a wealth of experience, and that's kind of so many other questions have kind of popped up from, especially when you start speaking about connections and that. I was like, oh gosh, like we're seeing the reiterations of the things that we know work already. What would you say was like the first serious case that really kind of impacted you when you went into the role?
Okay, so when I was in the school, in different roles, I've had lots of roles, and I'm still talking through them, but I'm going to talk about now when I was in that school. In those roles, so I had one, so this podcast comes with a massive, massive health warning and a trigger, because people who are listening to this themselves may be survivors of abuse, but also maybe experiencing abuse or know someone. So it's seeking help for yourself or someone, ringing the NSPCC helpline or the Samaritans or other services. So the first horrible case I had was from within a family, familiar abuse, and it was one where, unfortunately, it went to court, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge, and the person who was victim to abuse on a regular basis could not see the harm that was experiencing from the person who they really put on the pedestal and loved. And again, it was a very complex case because, when I say case family, because everyone was colluding to cover up what happened. And that was the first time I saw, wow, this is real. They got away with it. They almost bribed the person. But also when I was in the school, it was interesting. The misunderstanding of what social workers do was interesting to teachers. So I remember a teacher coming in, Anne-Marie, I need you right now. This kid needs to go into care. So I went up to the class. The kid was under the desk. And I dealt with him, because in working in residential social work, you do a lot of crisis intervention. And I got the child, we spoke. It was an adolescent. He was about 14. He was a child who was neurodivergent. He was amazing. He'd pop in the office anyway, so I knew him. And he had an argument with his mother that morning and hated his mother. He was from a wealthy family, and he was embarrassed of his wealth because he knew there was people out there who were poorer than that. And it was unfair. So he was very black and white with, this isn't fair, and I don't like the way you are, and you're not doing right. So he didn't want to go home, but it wasn't obviously the threshold for him to go into care. So in speaking to the teacher, they then understood. And then I spoke to the parent, blah, blah, blah. And then from there, we did some mediation work, and the child was fine. And there's another girl who came from a very strict religious family. It was actually an Irish family for this particular girl. Not all Irish families are, but this girl was. She was gay. She didn't want to tell her mother. She felt she let her mother down. She locked herself in the stationery cupboard. The head called me. I went in there with her. She had a weapon that she wanted to harm herself with. And about 2 hours later, we kind of got her down to a place where I reassured her, etc., etc. And yeah, she was fine.
So just listening to those two scenarios, it's interesting that you are called as kind of the person to fix it. Is it fair to say that sometimes schools see safeguarding as a role as opposed to a lens in which to see situations?
Okay. I love that question. It's interesting you say that. So when you think about teaching training, so I did a 3-year degree where I chose safeguarding as my career. And on the front line, investigating child abuse in families, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm aware that since 2014, the DfE have given us Keeping Children Safe in Education.
Yep.
And prior to that, I was managing teams of social workers where we had family support workers, social work assistants, and social workers. And we used to do a lot of community work with our family support workers. But with austerity kicking in, that I started to see about 2009, they were the first people to go, the support services. And then I saw, obviously, post Victoria Climbié, we had then the Common Assessment Framework, CAF. I then saw more emphasis on schools. And then I remember doing training around CAF, Common Assessment Framework to schools, around holistic needs of children. And they were rejecting it and I don't blame them, because they're as educators around behaviour management, teaching the curriculum, not getting involved in home life. And I appreciate that. So I did see it was very black and white. Can you come and fix this?
Yeah.
And the team I was in was also around behaviour as well. So it was a really good model at that time. And right now, I think, unfortunately, as things have escalated in the world we're in 2026, it's a lot on teachers to do this.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely going to get to that. So, yes. Yeah. All right. Thank you for kind of touching on that. And I would say, what do schools think safeguarding is, in your opinion?
Okay.
And where are they getting things wrong? What is it actually? So kind of almost like rhetoric versus reality.
Okay. So before I answer that, I just got to tell you about another experience that will give you explain why I can answer that well. So in managing the social workers in schools after I left that other role, then I managed teachers as well. We had then something called the EMAG, Ethnic Minority Achievement Grant. You might remember Ilya in a London Education Authority. I know, age. And in that, I was managing a team of a few teachers who were dealing with newly arrived families, and also children, 3 teachers who were working with children in care before the virtual school came along. And in that role, I was a safeguarding advisor to 75 schools. I was a LADO also, the local authority designated officer, delivered training, and also I was doing safeguarding work around the school improvement team. So in those roles, I understood safeguarding reviews, compliance, Ofsted, complaints, and also allegations against staff. Okay. And then with that, I then also was kind of doing case management with head teachers, and then it was CPOs, child protection officers, that then went to DSLs later on. So with all that experience, then I can see now the growth and the changes. So you can answer that question again, and I can now answer it, people understanding my confidence in answering.
Okay. No, I understand. So my question would be, what do schools think safeguarding is versus what actually is it?
So safeguarding was a new word that came post Victoria Climbié.
Yes.
And that was the word, we had the 5 outcomes, Every Child Matters agenda. You might remember that.
Yeah,
we had the rainbow, the continuum need, etc.
I think that's when I 2007 is when I first came into education, and that was...
It was hot then.
Yeah.
So it came in 2004. The Children's Act 2004 was amended. Private fostering came in. There's lots of new changes. So when that came in, schools then... But prior to that, one could argue they were quite reactive. Because that was all we knew, reactive. If a child was to do something, then we'd ring up social services, which it was called then. And then we went to children and families, et cetera. Then we went to different names, and now we're, children's services, or we're MASH, multi-agent safeguarding hub, et cetera. So safeguarding was something that grew over those years, those decades where we are today. So KICSI was, I say, first published or born in 2014. We've got a consultation out right now for the September 26th version. So what people thought it was when it came in was the holistic needs of children. Also around that time, growing, we had the SOAM inquiries, which has been Ian Huntley. So we learned a lot around safer recruitment, and we had the CRBs, and then we went to DBSs. So there's lots going on about safeguarding. And then we had the Jimmy Savile tragedy, I call it, where the world woke up to the reality of abuse, specifically child sexual abuse. And then we had the ICA inquiry, the inquiry to child sexual abuse again, which every sector was looked at: sports, arts, faith, education, institutions, etc., even media. And then what that kind of highlighted was the back end of the #MeToo movement. So we're in a place, can you see? It was continuing of this is what child protection and safeguarding is, even adults at risk. So in focusing on children today, What it is having a understanding of what it looks like when there's a person or child who's been subject to harm or likely to suffer harm. Likewise, a person who may pose a risk to children. So it's important we balance the two. When we're recruiting people, have we done our safe recruitment training to ensure we understand those kind of tendencies? We've had quite a few high-profile tragedies at the moment. I say tragedies as in terrible stories of abuse of nurseries at the moment. You've seen them in the press.
Yes.
And we know we've had quite a lot with schools generally when you either teach a conduct mispanel, etc. So in saying all of that, we know that there are people who unfortunately choose the childcare industry to access children, as well as people around children at home or in society, or even online. That definitely has grown in my 30-year career. The internet, online messaging, etc. Hence, the government are now giving us guidance on how to deal with, in the guidance for parents for 2-year-olds. Strange, anyway. So, answering the question, it's something where it's ongoing. It's like electricity; it doesn't stop. We must remain updated. We must understand our role in that is everyone's responsibility.
Yes.
It's not only a policy. So gone are the days of a policy being in a folder in a shelf on the school. It's now electronic. It's now discussed a lot. We all must familiarise ourselves. So the fact that we've got a requirement that all staff must read part 1 of Keeping Children Safe in Education every year and sign to say they fully understood is as a meaning of, do you understand your safeguarding responsibility? And recently, because I do a lot of investigations, I'm independent and people use me lots to go in and do fact finding. There's been incidents where people want to whistleblow, i.e. report something, but don't want to name the person, i.e. they're their colleague. And they don't realise by highlighting a concern and not saying it, you're not actually following the safeguarding policy, and potentially you're putting a child at risk.
The one you signed.
Yes, absolutely. So this is how complex it is, and understanding the reality of our professional roles and our personal roles. Meaning, when we come in, we befriend and we know colleagues, as well as knowing them as kind of colleagues, but also individually, hence socialising. But also children and the young people we're working with, do we really understand how they're exposed to abuse, what they're experiencing online, at home, people they know, trust, and what's our role in that?
This is causing me to think about so many different things. And it's true, because I love how you put the idea of our professional role and our professional duty to the children that we care for, and someone I've worked with for and having to maybe have an uncomfortable conversation. And as humans, it is difficult to balance that up, especially, and this is why being in education and an educational professional, and I use that term all the time, like you're an educational professional, because if you were in finance, for example, and you saw financial misconduct, or people, you'd probably be more comfortable to talk about that because it's numbers on a page. Whereas you may see traits or texts or, I was on such and such and such and such, and I saw Johnny commented underneath her, and that's not appropriate. And then I realised they're following each other. That's a conversation that needs to be
absolutely
had.
Report that, definitely.
100%. So, and it is difficult. It is difficult because there are other elements. There's professional elements, like I work with you. There are cultural elements as well, like no snitching culture. It happens in the workplace as well.
Yeah, certainly does. And I think
whistleblowing.
So what we tend to forget is, like, you see me here today, and I'm being professional because I'm on a podcast and I'm being sensible. But after hours, I'm individual. I'm Anne-Marie, and I can be who I want to be, and I've got that right to be. And with schools, you socialise a lot after school, and fine, why not? You're human, and that's when again you see a different part of that person, and they might confide in you. So I remember interviewing a woman who was witnessed one of her colleagues actually hit a child. It was a SEN school, but it was more to do with this child ran into her and she pushed them. So it was like a allegation of physical harm. And she didn't want to take part in these interviews because it's her friend. She didn't want her to lose her job, etc., etc. In speaking to this person, it got to the point where through HR, if they hadn't taken part and hence followed the policies, they were at risk of losing their own jobs, potentially. That makes sense? So there's an element of, when I spoke to this person, They were in tears. They didn't want to talk at first. And then eventually they started talking and they felt really guilty. So the first 10 minutes was about how guilty they felt in talking about their friend who just survived an illness, who's going through a divorce, who's financially struggling. And then after that realised that they could lose their job too. And that's why they contributed to the interview. So that's just an example of how complex it is in understanding their personal circumstances. But again, understanding that what they've done is not your responsibility. You know, you're not accountable for it and you witnessed it. So you need to actually now engage in the safeguarding process.
Yeah, I'll speak to you about an incident off
Okay,
air.
okay.
There was an incident, not even in schools, I'm happy to speak about this publicly as well, because the person's been convicted and received 14 years in local community. And it was somebody who, you know, where you'd seen one and two things. And that made you uncomfortable, and two and two weren't making four, but you almost kind of think to yourself, oh, like, and this is where I speak about safeguarding being everybody's job, not necessarily just in schools as well. That wasn't very comfortable. And oftentimes that instinct, my mum used to always speak about kind of that gut instinct is right when you see things, and it's important that you protect those vulnerable, not even necessarily children, people who are vulnerable in and around you. But yes, you've triggered me with a lot of the things that you, and I'm sure with these conversations you do, but I kind of want to bring it back to schools as well, because something that's a massive issue. You've got school refusers and attendance. Yeah. So just kind of what things are you seeing in regard to school refusal, attendance, and being linked to safeguarding? What are you kind of seeing?
So what's new? I'm a bit of a Kixie geek and a safeguarding geek, so I apologise in advance.
No, that's fine.
So there was new guidance that came out last year about safeguarding and children on roll not attending and getting their voice, even though when they're not they are on roll, but they're not attending.
Yep.
So how do you capture the voice of the child when they're not attending your school, but they're on your roll? Which means how often are you speaking to them, not via the parent, but the child themselves. So there's something there in that. But we have seen post-COVID an increase of, elective home education. And we know the government are currently trying to make, because Sarah Sharif, the girl who was murdered by her father in Surrey.
Yes.
We know the review came out last year, but what came out of that was we know that the government are currently trying to ban or bar parents who, so at the moment, a parent can automatically electively home educate. Yep. But what they want to do is for parents who are involved in safeguarding processes, or a school can present lots of safeguarding concerns that need to be escalated or investigated, those parents will not have the automatic right. So it's very complex. However, reminding listeners that actually, and viewers, that actually a lot of children who are home educated do very well.
Yes.
So the balance is they do very well, and there's only a handful.
We spoke about it recently. We spoke about the balance.
Yeah, the balance
of homeschooling. Yeah.
So I'm not kind of demonizing. I'm not demonizing all. It's just basically making that point. However, in safeguarding, I did see families who wanted to be removed from professionals and isolated. I saw that quite a lot, and our hands were tied. They've got a right to do that. So that will change, which is brilliant. Because we call them invisible kids or ghost kids. Yeah. So with the whole EBSTers we're calling, emotionally based school avoiders, there's lots of different names we use. Of course, what support is there for them? Because one could argue that one of the agreements we have in safeguarding, one of the kind of requirements is to ensure they have a successful transition to adulthood and effective care at home. So under that duty we have, which is one of the bullet points we have under the definition of safeguarding, we have a duty of care to work with that family and also to ensure that, we try to get the child back in. It might be, again, referral to the educational psychologist. It could be referral to the medical tuition. But that child under the Children's Act and Education Act has got a right to be educated. So we don't give up on that. And that new guidance that came out last year is, while they're on our roll, we've still got a duty of care and to ensure that their well-being and their needs are being met. So it's important that, who in your school is that person to do the home visits, to do that work. What we can't do is only go via the parent's voice. We need that child voice. So again, are the right agencies involved? Have you held a professionals meeting? etc. And if you are doing home visits, you need a home visit policy or lone
Yep.
working policy. And again, we don't go in kids' bedrooms, let them come downstairs. Parents should be there, etc. So it's just safeguarding ourselves too.
It's if we're going to be honest, it is a lot. It is a lot. And even when you spoke about connections and you spoke about all of the multi-agencies that would be involved in that. And when we look at things that are here now, there's a lot of kind of weight on schools and on educators. And it almost seems like there's a failure in the system. I'm going to ask a question. Where is the system failing children right now? Just your honest opinion from a school's perspective. What's happening? Because there's all this pressure on schools. And as a senior leader, we see it and feel it. A lot of our time is taken up with kind of safeguarding issues or around safeguarding, be it attendance, so on and so forth. Where's the system failing right now?
The system is failing, and this is my personal opinion.
Yep.
Obviously I've been working in safeguarding for over 30 years. But my opinion right now would be thresholds of child protection is very high.
Okay.
So to get a social work assessment, a lot has to be happening to get that threshold. And reminding you of the Section 47 threshold is a child is suffering or likely to suffer significant harm. We need real evidence to suggest that's happening of the sense of the suspicions of. So that's the first thing. So many years ago, thresholds weren't as high. And many years ago, we had more permanent social workers.
We did.
And then over the years, there's more money that locum workers get, locum being agency workers. So now we've got a lot of vacancies that have to be filled because it's a government role where we need statutory people on the front line to work. So therefore we go to agencies, etc. So that's where some of the mess is as well, because they're trying to do quite a lot around retention and retaining staff. So the system's broken as the thresholds are high, and also the high turnover of social workers. On top of that, it's also the reality of how complex the living experiences of children are today, from online, from pornography, all the things, child abuse, mental health, self-harm, lots and lots and lots. So with online being another factor where they are accessible, and again, the whole vulnerability in society of the quick kind of fear of missing out and I want everything at the same time, children are kind of driven into doing things where they're tricked into doing things, and even adults are. But the system is broken because hence the government are trying to, like last year it was adolescence was a big thing about misogyny. At the moment it's about online safety. Then it's about deep fakes. Then it's about, all these things, AI, etc. So it's an ongoing thing where hence broken, questionable, meaning I argue that are we updated? So I deliver DSL training. I do about 3 or 4 sessions a week, and I do lots of audiences. And I also do international safeguarding. So if anyone has listened to this from an international school, this is still relevant to you, by the way, 100%. Even though you said UK, but it's still relevant because when I do international safeguarding, it's very similar around the world because online social media is the same. What's different is the legislation, expectations by your inspectorates. That's the only difference, okay? And also the culture, potentially. So it's really complex. And look, what is the role of the family? What's the role of the parents? What's the role of society? What's the role of, the head? The role of the teacher, the tutor, the head of year? All these are quite important in having a framework in place. And we know Kixie's been saying for many years, it's everyone's responsibility. And everyone means, the stakeholders being parents, staff, and pupils. And you're only a school. You're only a school. You can't fix everything. So it's about society. It's about the clubs they go to. It's about the faith groups they go to. It's about society.
I agree so much because it often feels, and I know this might be a controversial statement, it often feels that like the system expects schools to fix these problems that we haven't necessarily created, and we don't actually have the resources to fix. And every time there's an issue around young people in society, the media focuses, let's sort it out in the schools. Let's sort it out in the schools. And the truth is, we don't have the resources. And it's not as if the government are throwing tens of millions of pounds at school and education to fix these societal problems. So sometimes it can be very, very frustrating because in the same way you're seeing that kind of staff burnout in the social care industry, you're seeing that staff do the same things in education.
No, I know.
With retention,
No, I know.
with staff, with professionalism,
I know.
and it can be really difficult.
Definitely. And in social workers, we have safeguarding supervision every 3 weeks where we talk about the emotional impact it has on us.
Yeah.
And I know in schools they started to talk about safeguarding supervision, but it's really important. And I deliver that as well to lots of DSLs and lots of multi-academy trusts. And in those sessions, we normally do them half-termly. And we look at, our well-being in the role we're doing every day. We look at the complex cases, our challenges, and we talk through complex cases. And sometimes, I have that motto, think the unthinkable and believe it could happen here.
Yeah.
And
Sorry, that's you got to understand, that's a clip, that's a viral clip you just said that. Sorry, could you just repeat that, please? Anne-Marie.
My motto, so when one of the things I really believe in, and I myself have been involved in 2 child safeguarding reviews as a social work manager. The nature of working with children is one day a child we're working with might be involved in an incident where your records might be called. And normally it's anyone involved at any time in that child's life, by the way. And the children were, the ones for me, they were closed at the time, years after. But the point I'm making is we need to have a it could happen here approach and think the unthinkable. So with that, as a social work manager, every decision I made, I thought of the worst scenario, and then I stepped backwards to know, okay, that didn't happen. Okay, what could have done? Then we find out what it was, but think the worst scenario. So online, is this child being exploited? Have they shared images, etc.? Rather than by not being professionally curious, I'm accepting what the child's told me at face value.
So, sorry, think the unthinkable and
believe it could happen here.
Think the unthinkable and believe it could happen. So you're saying almost as a framework of safeguarding, that is almost a lens in which you should be seeing things.
And then for us also on top of that, we must be professionally curious as in education, as teachers and staff, but also in the intersectional world we live in, we must also be culturally competent.
Yes.
Around that neurodivergent male who's kind of Black Caribbean, but also, 5'6". We know about adultification. We know, what we learned about that from Janine Davis, who's now, Dr. Davis. Well done, Janine. And there's an element there about understanding, do we understand that when that child leaves the school, they could be stopped and searched?
Yeah.
And because they're neurodivergent, people might believe their behaviour is suspicious. So we really must understand cultural competence. For example, the flags. We know in England we have the flags, the red lines on the flags. And again, understanding the impact that would have had in the whole conflict we've got at the moment in the country around immigration, the impact it's having with racism, for example, on our Black and brown children, the increase we're seeing on social media. So by having and being culturally competent and up to date and professionally curious, we can see whatever country it is, that there's conflict in the playground still. And we need to actually unite people and get through that. By not understanding cultural competence, professional curiosity, and seeing it as behavioural, we're not helping.
I love that. I'm gonna just repeat that one more time. Was it think
the unthinkable?
Think the unthinkable and
believe it could happen here.
Believe it could happen here. And in essence, if you are taking safeguarding from that perspective, where it's not necessarily to blow things out of proportion and you see a mark and it means it's that element of professional curiosity and operating within that. And this is why being an educational professional is so important.
And also, just saying that, I had a memory back when I was based in the school. And one thing that really worked when I was based in the school, and I know teachers are very, very busy. You've got all those periods to teach, etc., etc. But one thing that worked for us, and I was non-teaching, so I appreciate that, was being approachable. And I remember by being approachable, the open door policy, but more around understanding, then that child would know that they can approach you. And as we know, children are socially awkward when it comes to talking about things.
Yep.
And I know that right now, the word that I've heard in the last year's test report was, I sat on the safeguarding sofa test last year, May.
Okay.
And we spoke about the themes that were coming out. And one thing I learned on that panel was there's a word called digitally fluent. So children are now digitally fluent, which means they're more likely to tell you something through an expression online than face to face. So just being aware of being approachable. And when I was in the school, by that child who wanted to talk to me, who wanted to give me that punchline, that they knew they could, and it would take time. And sometimes it'd be sitting in my office, sometimes it'd be just talking to me, but the words just couldn't connect for them. But eventually they told me. And by being professionally curious, it might be about an incident or something that happened or about their friend. And then eventually they'll talk about the friend and then the incident and then what's happened. And straight away I would see, sorry. So straight away I would then think the worst, but they haven't told me yet.
Yeah.
So I remember one girl telling me she met someone, plaited their hair, etc.
Yeah.
Went to their house and I knew straight away, here we go.
Yeah.
And then within time, she then told me she was coerced into doing something she didn't want to do, health warning. And then she didn't know where to go with that. And I supported her. I listened to her, I told her where we're going to go next and etc. She's not in trouble. We spoke to her parent. And then I did a home visit that evening to speak to her parent with her. And then we got the police involved, etc. But it's really important just being there and having that time. And I appreciate in schools that's very difficult.
I'm gonna ask you a SLT based question. So this is for our senior leaders who are watching. So the question would be, like, from a staffing perspective and from an SLT perspective, what, in your opinion, should senior leaders be doing differently in regards to safeguarding as a whole? So what should we be doing differently when approaching safeguarding?
So the DSL is SLT. And of course, we understand that. Then you've got SLT should also, so who's the deputy safeguarding lead? Okay. Who's the DDSL? Yeah. Are they another SLT member or are they just somebody else? Okay. But for SLT, everyone should understand, what does safeguarding look like in your school? So when you're doing your SLT duties, when you're being professionally curious, etc., just having that open mind and understanding, it's also our role as senior leaders to be the role model, but also to be understandable and approachable, and understanding that we're going to be, we're going to take it seriously. And also staff code of conduct. So it's our responsibility for SLT to also be alert. And again, don't collude, meaning remember professional and personal relationships. So you as SLT, you're there as SLT, working, alongside the head teacher, etc., principal, and then you've got the board of governors. Okay, so strategically, you're one of those, and you have a responsibility to ensure that safeguarding is activated. Okay. So at the moment, as an SLT member, do you know what themes are happening? Do you understand how the children who are social workers? Do you know the children who are looked after? Do you understand and know what our roles are and how we treat those children slightly differently based on their circumstances, rather than it's behavioural? So I remember actually when I was in the school, there was a boy who'd just been interviewed because he'd been subject to harm by his stepmom the night before. And in school at the time, he was all over the place, as in behavioural challenges, defiant, etc. And then when I went in to SLT to tell them that he'd been involved and I needed to take him to talk to him, hence nurturing talk, they couldn't understand at first. And then I explained he'd been involved in an incident. I said, okay, I get it. So by being trauma-informed, like trauma-informed practice is something where we take into account why is this child, what's going on for this child, why they're like this. So going in high pitch sometimes is appropriate because we need to stop the situation. But for some children, it's triggering further trauma. So we just need to be really mindful of when we do get called as SLT, how are we trying to resolve the situation without creating further trauma for that child. So having a nurturing, calm, it's a bit like when you have a child, there's a kind of, I can't remember the approach now, where some parents go through this kind of particular approach where you don't scream and yell when you're having contractions, but you take a deep breath and you kind of hum when you calm. So a child who's in crisis, they don't want further crisis. They want calm intervention. So how do we, as SLT, intervene in a calm, neutral manner where, like a paramedic, you treat anyone, even someone who's a perpetrator, like the person who's caused the harm, you still got to medically treat them. As SLT members, it should be the same theory. Regardless of who's done what, they're only children. And also, on top of that, we've got a right to keep them safe, but also treat them fairly and give them a voice and nurture them.
I'm going to give you some quick fire questions, some quick fire safeguarding questions, because we've got an expert in the house. So I'm just going to pose a few quick fire questions. I need short, concise answers. This is where you're seeing a teacher come out of me now. Yeah, that's what you're seeing. This is where I've gone from Ziggy to Mr. Moore. Yeah?
I'm a year 11 student now.
Yeah.
It's cool.
So just, if I was going to say to you, okay, so give me top 3 safeguarding signs teachers must look out for.
Okay, so when a child is quiet, so sometimes we see quietness as okay. Why are they quiet? And there's something I also say about the grey children. I hate that word. So grey children are children that just blend in. Mm-hmm. What's going on for those grey children? So don't only pay attention. So when we've got the attention loud children, we call them attention seeking. I call it attention needing children. So we need to appreciate that children communicate in different ways. And we shouldn't just stereotype to think, oh, the loud one's got problems and the quiet one hasn't. So one tip would be see all children as how they communicate with us, their behaviour or not, i.e. they might be quiet people or just blend in. So every child could be a curious child rather than they seem to be okay.
Yeah.
That's one tip. Other tip would be, what are they expressing in their homework? So some subjects like drama, art, English, creative writing, etc. Are they trying to express themselves in a way that we're missing? So what do we do around those subjects to then support the teachers in listening out for that? And another one is the sign would be, where are your blind spots right now in your setting? Every setting's got blind spots. So when you do your site walk, where are your blind spots? Where's those
do you mean
places?
Like the actual areas?
Yeah. So where in your schools are those areas where if I was a child who wanted to cause harm, I can go there right now and know that no one goes up that corridor or no one's going to come in. So every school has them. And when you find it, the children will find another one. So every week, or at least a few times a week, walk around your school just randomly and find those areas. So it's just the blind spots and being aware of the areas where, so for some schools with upskirting, for example, they then had to look at their stairwells. Yeah. And then they had to realise that they had to only use one stairwell in the day to stop other things happening in other ways. So it's just doing a risk assessment around keeping or reducing harm happening during those lesson changeovers.
Yeah. Those are brilliant. Okay, and this is probably, I've got 2 more, but I think this is the big one, yeah? A lot of teachers worry about this. What do you do when a child discloses something to you? Okay. So we've got the generic answer for the interviews.
Yeah.
If a child tells anything to me, I have to tell the child that I will tell. But in it, what do you do?
Okay. So first of all, I always say this: the child has chosen you. Mm-hmm. Okay. I've interviewed hundreds of children who, have gone through social services, i.e. a Section 47. So they've told the school, and then we've come in. So in speaking to that child, I know, and I'm a stranger, they've chosen you as a teacher because they know that you believe in them and they feel comfortable with you. So that's the first thing to acknowledge. It's not random, they chose you. Secondly is, it took a long process for that child to get to that stage of telling you. So it wasn't random. So there's an element of, I know I want to say something, I can't get the words out. Do you know how many times they've been in front of you and want to tell you, but haven't told you? But today was the day they told you. When they're telling us, the first thing is, wow, thank you for telling me. Thank you for trusting me with that. Mm-hmm. So reassure them that, it's an emotive thing and you really, really got their back. And thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. So the first thing is just the warmth of emotions. Secondly, it was, you're not in trouble. And now what we need to do is, now you've told me that, I'm concerned and I want to support you with this, but I need to speak to the teacher who's been trained to go to next. Yeah. And of course, they've just told you something which leaves them a bit vulnerable. So I will say this, Ziggy. Some of us, can you remember the time when you told your loved one for the first time you loved them? So all of us in our life at one time have told our loved one or a loved one, potentially partner here, rather than your family. Yep. Okay. For the first time, you realised, I love them, I want to tell them. So when you knew you wanted to tell them, you had to find that right time to tell them. And your hope that when you told them you love them, that they'd love you back. Yeah. So with kids, young children and young people, it's the same. So they're telling you where they're making themselves vulnerable, sharing something from their heart with you. Mm-hmm. Of course, in capturing it, you need to make them feel connected and emotional, but obviously with professional boundaries. Okay? So that's the first thing. So they're vulnerable like how we feel vulnerable in that moment. And that's why I've given you that example. So in sealing that, then we can put them to a place of safety, but don't send them back to class. So like they feel vulnerable right now. Can they go in? So some students might want to go back on, some might want to go to the library, some might want to go, want to go home, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So we then say to the child, okay, now you've told us that it's now such a time, you've got science. Do you want to go back to science, or do you want to go in the library, or what's next for you? So we can't dictate that. We ask the child of what choices they want. And then from there, we see what we do. But what we don't do is let them go home. Okay. So before, we must let the DSL know, and then do your procedural thing. And then you need to update the young person as well. So they need to know what's going to happen when I get home. Steps. Is it about one of their friends? Is it about someone at home or someone else? Because they want to know awkwardness. Next time I see them, will they know that I said something? So all of these things are really important in kind of what the child's also thinking. Have they got any questions for you, etc.?
Okay. I love that. I love that analogy as well, because that is a very vulnerable time. I was going to say, especially as a male, because we're not used to being like
vulnerable.
Societally being vulnerable. That hit home. I would say, okay, so if I was going to ask you one final quick fire question, it would be around training.
Okay.
I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And this is where my personal, I told you about my background.
And
so forth. I get quite frustrated when people don't take safeguarding training seriously. So why do you not think that safeguarding training really sticks in schools, and what can school leaders do to really prioritize that time on the 1st of September when everybody comes?
The insets.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So by then, we also know we've got the Keeping Children Safe updates.
Yep.
And they normally come in on the same day or whatever. So we've just got it, and hopefully we get one in the summer, but we need to know what the new changes. On top of that, you've also got to think about, in every school, it's very unique what safeguarding looks like. What's your cohort? Yeah. Okay. What's your age group? What's your kind of biggest group, dominant group, et cetera, et cetera. And it will vary. So it's really important that the training reflects your local area too, and your local cohort. It shouldn't be off the shelf, ABC. Okay. It should be very tailor-made to your setting. So when I do training, I like to speak to DSL beforehand. What are the themes you get? What are the challenges you're facing, etc. To put that in. Yep. You've also got to put in the procedures. You've also got to put in what their role is. Hence, we don't investigate and ask leading questions. And that's another thing in the question you just asked me about the disclosures. Yep. We do not ask leading questions. So when the child says something, we'll say, you'll summarise to say what you just said was that, okay, now you've told me I need to do something. You do not ask further questions. So in training, it should be very clear that all staff know their role, but also in that, it should be at least 3 hours. So I say that is, and preferably face-to-face. So if you're doing e-learning, do e-learning, but bring the group together to talk about local case studies. Talk about a case review that's happening in your local area.
I like that.
But what's really important is think about scenarios that you as a school have faced, including parents, including staff, think about, staff conduct, think about, safer working, think about online AI. So think about, so anyone who's had training in 2026 or 25, the latter part in the first term, who had not been taught about AI or the updates and all what's going on, you haven't been updated on things, because at the moment AI is taking over quite a lot of safeguarding challenges. Yeah. So it's really important it's up to date. And the person who's doing it, so most of the time you get the DSL, which is fine. They need to get the resources. Sometimes the local authority give it to them. Sometimes they find it themselves. It must be updated. So, for example, Working Together to Safeguard Children has just been updated 2026. Okay. They've got new guidance about restrictions on how you can, in SEN children. That's also just come out April 26th. So it must be relevant and up to date. And it has to also be mindful of the audience that you're going to do it to themselves could have been harmed. Yes. So think about staff well-being, thinking about signposting staff of their own, because the statistics tell us there are going to be staff who are experiencing abuse, domestic abuse, or themselves with childhood abuse, physical, emotional, neglect, or sexual, but also potentially there could be perpetrators in your group as well. And there could be, a lot of things where you want to encourage people to come forward. So again, it's just really important that in training, it has to be something where it's, balanced with facts. So a bit of research, use footage, make it local, and this person delivering it should have a fantastic knowledge, a good knowledge. If they haven't got the right knowledge, it's not going to get in.
It's a waste of time.
Yeah.
It's a waste of time.
Yeah, yeah.
Brilliant. Wow. Okay, so that has been powerful. It's been quite emotive as well. We're gonna say, I think the main thing I've taken away from it, and I think I stick to that point, is that safeguarding is not just paperwork. It's not just policies. We're actually dealing with real people, real life things, and hopefully through this conversation and teachers, senior leaders, anybody in education, you can begin to embody that. And I hope that you've been able to take that away. So thank you very much.
No problem. And
for taking the time to come down and speak to us.
And thank you for the invitation. And a big thing I want to talk about is also cultural competence.
Yes.
So on the back end of your safeguarding question, it also must be culturally competent as well. So it has to reflect the communities you serve.
Yes.
And also your staff communities in understanding the values and belief systems of families and also our staff. Because by that way, like, what are the barriers to why staff don't report? Likewise, what are the barriers to why families don't or children do? So it's really important that we understand, our intersectional lens in safeguarding. Even if you've got, so sometimes schools have said to me, well, we don't have any cultures in our school. We've only got white children, depending on where they are. We've still got a duty of care to educate people about all types of families. Because the nature of England is,
it's still very diverse.
Of
Because
course
you've got class,
you've got classism, you've got, also, a lot of Europeans who might be, Caucasian, white skinned, but also have their own culture. You've got religion. Absolutely. And that's why I'm saying it. So it's not actually about melanin. It's actually about understanding values and belief systems and people's culture in their countries. But thank you very much for the invitation. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you for ending on that point. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Make sure you are, I have to do the business, make sure you are liking, subscribe, share, comment on all of our stuff. And thank you very much for tuning in. And make sure you tune in for the next SLT podcast.
Thank you.
Beautiful.